Hello and welcome to The Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the noise, really get into the core of the big global shifts happening right now. And before we jump into today's main topic, if you're looking to understand the deeper historical currents, especially concerning China, there's a fantastic resource.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about the History of China series by Hui. It's available on Amazon, incredibly well-researched, but also, really engaging.
Right. It gives such a valuable context. The latest book, The Liao Dynasty, is out now, ebook and paperback. Definitely worth checking out for perspective on, well, a lot of what we discussed.
It really is. Essential context, like you said.
Okay, so let's dive in. Today, we're looking at what feels like a truly profound shift in international trade and U.S. foreign policy. Some are calling it a new era in trade disputes. And this isn't just some minor headline you skim past. This could fundamentally reshape how international commerce actually functions, especially for, U.S. tech companies dealing with China. It feels like a really big moment. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, let's do that. Because what's really striking here, the core detail that kind of set off alarm bells everywhere comes via the Financial Times. They reported that two massive American tech players, Nvidia and AMD, have apparently agreed to something extraordinary. They've reportedly agreed to pay 15% of their revenue, not profit, but actual revenue, from certain AI chip sales in China directly to the U.S. government.
Wow.
And here's the kicker. This isn't some voluntary contribution. It's reportedly a direct condition for them to even get the export permits they need for these really high-demand tips.
That distinction you just made, revenue versus profit, that's absolutely critical, isn't it?
It's huge.
Because 15% of profit, okay, maybe companies see that like a tax, something you negotiate, but 15% of gross revenue, that's taking a massive slice right off the top.
Right off the top line.
It's a direct cut the U.S. government would take from sales by private American companies into a foreign market. I mean, why is this specific mechanism just so significant? What really makes it unprecedented?
Well, you hit the nail on the head there. When you look back historically, it really is groundbreaking. U.S. companies, certainly in modern times, have simply never agreed to hand over a share of their top-line revenue just to get an export license.
So what did they do before? What were the tools?
The traditional tools were quite different. We've seen, outright bans on specific technologies, sometimes targeting whole companies, think Huawei.
Right.
We've seen strict export controls, limiting what sensitive goods like advanced chips could be sold where. And of course, the big one, tariffs. Taxes applied at the border on goods coming into the U.S.
Yeah, those national level tariffs, we've heard a lot about those. Things like, say, a potential flat 10% tariff on imports from China or Japan or even allies like Canada or Mexico.
Exactly. And those were always negotiations between nations. It was country A saying, we're taxing goods from country B. The money collected went into country A's treasury.
But this feels completely different.
It's a total pivot. It's moving towards almost company by company, deal by deal arrangements. The administration seems to be negotiating directly, maybe even quietly, with individual corporations.
Imposing specific conditions on their sales abroad.
Precisely. So it's not about a broad national import policy anymore. It's this shift from the macro, the big picture national strategy, down to these very targeted micro-level corporate deals. It's like a whole new way for a government to steer its private sector's global actions.
Okay, here's where my head starts to spin a little. Because when Nvidia and AMD sell these AI chips into China under this reported deal, the U.S. government is essentially collecting a kind of tariff on those sales, right?
In effect, yeah.
But normally, if China put an import tariff on those chips, Beijing would get the money.
Correct.
But here, the U.S. government is somehow reaching into that transaction happening outside its borders and pulling 15% of the value back to Washington before it even properly lands with the U.S. company or potentially gets taxed by China.
That's the core mechanism as reported. It redirects value that would normally stay with the company or, go to the Chinese government if they imposed an import tariff. It's a novel way to capture value from international trade.
And the economic impact, for China specifically, what does that look like?
Well, it could be pretty substantial, not just symbolic. If Nvidia and AMD are effectively losing 15% of their revenue on these sales right off the bat, it seems almost inevitable that Chinese buyers will end up facing higher prices.
Because the companies have to make up that margin somehow.
Exactly. You can't just absorb a 15% hit to your top line on high-value products like these chips without passing at least some of that cost along. So in practice, it works like a cost imposed on the Chinese market.
A burden passed down the supply chain.
Right. And for industries relying on these chips, that could be a significant added expense. For the chip makers themselves, 15% of revenue could wipe out a huge chunk, maybe even all, of their net profit on those specific sales. It really changes the math for everyone involved.
And you mentioned Nvidia and AMD. Is this just about them, or is this potentially wider?
Well, the reports suggest it's likely not just limited to those two. The indication is that the U.S. administration might be pursuing similar deals with other firms, too.
So a broader strategy.
It points towards a broader strategy, yeah. A new playbook, perhaps, focused on controlling and maybe even extracting value from U.S. company sales overseas, particularly in sectors deemed strategically critical, like AI.
AI is definitely the battleground here, it seems.
Washington clearly sees it that way.
Yeah.
And they seem willing to use some very non-traditional, quite aggressive policies to gain an edge. It's moved beyond just restricting access. It feels like it's about controlling and monetizing that access, too.
Okay, but there's more to it than just the money, right? I heard something about technical aspects.
Ah, yes. This raises, I think, an even bigger question, especially for the buyers in China. There's a technical dimension that's possibly more worrying than the 15%.
Which is what?
Allegedly, and this is reportedly at Congress's insistence, the specific chips sold to China under these deals come with two built-in backdoors.
Backdoors, you mean vulnerabilities?
Essentially, yes. Features built into the hardware. One, apparently, is designed to track who buys the chips and how they're used, so persistent traceability.
Okay, tracking. And the other?
The other is potentially more dramatic. The ability to remotely disable the chips, turn them off from afar.
Wow, remotely disable them.
That's the report. So for any Chinese entity buying these chips, especially if they're building critical AI infrastructure, well, that raises huge questions about reliability, about control.
Absolutely. Imagine basing your national AI strategy on hardware that could potentially be monitored or even bricked remotely.
Exactly. And the source reporting this suggests it's not so easy to just bypass or disable these features. So it might be a persistent vulnerability, introducing this inherent layer of distrust right into the silicon itself.
So let's pull back a bit. Look at the strategy overall. From a Western analyst's viewpoint, maybe this looks like a clever, forceful way to gain leverage, put pressure on China, maybe generate some revenue.
Short-term wins, perhaps?
You could frame it that way, yes. Apply significant pressure, maybe slow things down.
But the long term,
Right.
Is this sustainable? It feels incredibly aggressive, almost like poking the bear very directly.
And that's precisely the debate. Its long-term sustainability is highly questionable. Many analysts are arguing that this kind of direct, forceful policy, where companies comply, essentially because they have to, under threat of worse.
Well, it's likely to provoke strong countermeasures eventually.
Backlash.
Potentially serious backlash. Some analysts don't mince words. They characterize this kind of forceful approach, disrupting established norms, as almost a form of violence in policy terms, something that could risk the collapse of the cooperative frameworks that, global trade currently relies on.
So the risk is short-term gain, long-term pain.
That's the concern. While companies might go along initially to avoid being completely shut out of a market, relying too heavily on these kinds of unilateral, aggressive tactics could trigger escalating resistance.
How might that resistance look?
It could mean China doubling down on domestic chip production, seeking non-U.S. suppliers much more aggressively, or even finding ways to retaliate against American companies and other sectors operating in China. So yeah, the long-run effect could actually undermine U.S. interests by fracturing supply chains, shrinking markets for U.S. firms, and maybe even accelerating a kind of technological decoupling or balkanization.
So what does this all mean then? Summing it up for you listening, it really feels like these Nvidia and AMD deals, if accurately reported, mark a genuine historic turning point.
It certainly seems that way.
The U.S. isn't just sticking to taxing imports at its own border anymore. It's stepping into the transactions of its own companies in foreign markets and extracting revenue directly.
Oh.
Well, it's bold, it's definitely disruptive, and it could be totally transformative for how international economics and global commerce work. It's like economic statecraft just got a whole new, very sharp tool.
And how this specific strategy plays out, what the full implications are for supply chains, for tech development, for global cooperation, honestly, it's still very much up in the air. Will it lead to more secure domestic chains or just speed up decoupling? Will it really hobble China's AI progress or just force them to innovate faster internally? We just don't know yet.
A lot of uncertainty.
A huge amount. But one thing feels pretty certain. The old rules. They seem to be changing right before our eyes.
So as you consider this really profound shift we've been discussing, maybe think about what it implies for the future. The future of global supply chains, yes, but also for technological independence. How does something like this redefine national sovereignty when the lines between government action and corporate operations get this blurry in a deeply interconnected world? Something to chew on. And before we wrap up, just a quick reminder for that deeper historical context on China that often sheds light on today's events. Do check out Hui Wang's A History of China series. The latest volume, The Liao Dynasty, is out now in ebook and paperback on Amazon.
Really excellent series for background.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We look forward to exploring more significant global developments with you next time.